These are some of the main contributors to the greenhouse gas effect production. And that causes climate change. Well, in Latin America, it contributes only 10% of greenhouse gas effects. So they also undergo its impacts in a disproportionate manner. We have hurricanes, cyclones, floodings, droughts, increase of sea level, as well as the accelerated loss of glaciers. They threaten basic infrastructure, provision of potable water, and agricultural production, power production, and they also cause migrations that put at risk the life of millions of inhabitants in the region. However, the abundance of natural resources, as well as the extraordinary richness and diversity of ecosystems, put the region in a determinant position in the fight, a global fight against climate change. How can nature-based solutions favor mitigation, adaptation to climate crisis, to now and towards the future, and at the same time help preserve the natural capital? Which is the role of protected areas for the conservation of biodiversity? Which public policies are the most efficient to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to stop deforestation and the degradation of ecosystems? Which opportunities in agro do we have in the region in the global energetic transition process to achieve a better sustainable development without stop working for a region with lesser inequalities and greater growth? CAF presents its development and economy development global challenges, solutions at regional level, Latin America and the Caribbean before the climate crisis and biodiversity crisis. The document analyzes in depth the causes and effects of climate change and the loss of biodiversity in the region, and it offers a very bisectoral insight to challenges and opportunities in the region to face this crisis. CAP, Bank of Development from Latin America and the Caribbean.
Hola a todos.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Good afternoon. How are you? Oh, pretty smile. Okay, pretty good. So, have a great afternoon, all of you. Thank you for being here, Rosario Gomez. I am in Radio Talent, and on behalf of CAF, I want to welcome you all to these premises that gathers us today, this afternoon, to discuss, have some learnings as well, and so that we can see again, we see some familiar faces here, others that are not. So, thank you again. Please give a round of applause to you this afternoon to break the ice, if you agree. So, on behalf of CAF, the Development and Economic Plan for the Caribbean and Latin America, we welcome you to this regional presentation of the report of economy and development of 2003 global challenges, regional solutions, Latin America and the Caribbean before the climate change and biodiversity developed here in the city of Santa Marta. We are at INVEMAR, the Marine and Coastal Research Institute, INVEMAR. So today we have pretty well-known speakers, both men and women, to analyze all those challenges we have towards understanding these subjects and dynamics. Many of you would say, okay, I understand that already. Perhaps we from other places, from other points, even from the media. So I would dare to say that every day we're doing everything possible to understand this better and more, as well as adapting in terms of mitigation. We invite you to share your opinions this afternoon in social media with our hashtag with red half to follow our agenda, and then in Facebook and also X, we was previously Twitter, and in Twitter and Instagram. We are just like that, CAF agenda. We are also streaming in English, Spanish, and Portuguese on our website, caf.com, and also in our YouTube channel. Now, we're going to start officially this event, inviting to the scenario Mr. Sergio Diaz Granados, Executive President of CAF, for these words. So, thank you very much and welcome. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here in Santa Marta. So, it's not by chance. Nearly 2 years ago, along with Christian Asinelli, in Buenos Aires, we began the management of the bank. And talking to the Knowledge Bank at the bank, we planned almost 2 years ahead the preparation of these documents of the economy and development. The bank has been for 20 years, one of the contributions development banks do in particular is to generate knowledge products based in evidence, based in science and in research to provide solutions for Latin America and the Caribbean. So the bank has been doing this for 20 years now. So when we get to see the menu of options we had in Buenos Aires, so we had one idea, a strong idea for CAF, and it's to turn the bank into a green bank for Latin America. The strong idea here is that the bank would become a great financier and a catalyst of financing for green and blue solutions for Latin America and the Caribbean. So that's what we said in 2021 in September in Buenos Aires with the team. So we have to plan these to 2026. This is a tour that it's going to take, it's going to be costly, it's going to have a lot of efforts from the bank. It's a change within the bank, and it's a change in the relationship between the bank and its clients. So we also need to have the knowledge product that's going to help us in that transformation. So that's why we had this event. We don't have a timeline that's not met. With this first document, that for the effects of the bank, and even within the context of the development banks, one of the first things that we do is in such a comprehensive manner. They are not isolated messages about the urgency to adaptation to climate change. It's just a more comprehensive vision of where we are as a region and what we have to do. So I want to thank you again, Ernesto, and again, the management from Buenos Aires, because they're following us in the end. She's in the late stages of expectancy. So we want to thank you for your trust in this transformation process of the bank, inside out. It's generating a social knowledge process so that our sales force from the bank, so the front desk of the bank would move. So I think that we are now having a discussion here that's important. It was expected from 2 years ago with Christian. We've been doing that, and in the process to have this internal transformation from the bank, we decided to create a management office applied for this climate action, biodiversity, positive biodiversity, and we asked Alicia Montalvo, who's here with us, please raise if you want to, so you get to know her. Alicia, she's been working these subjects for many years now. It was a process, I mean, kind of falling in love in a good sense, to work with us in this front. And now I've talked to Christian and the whole team at General Secretariat, and our executive team working inwards the bank. We think that the bank 2026 will have 40% of its approvals as a green bank. That's to full the size. That's a big internal transformation. We talk about green bank, we talk about adaptation, mitigation, protection of natural capital. And of course, we cannot expect us to have this document to have that. How to start doing it? And we're on the way, learning along with our customers. And that could mean that we would accompany governments in improvements in regulations and policies. It could mean that we accompany them and follow up with them in exchange of that for nature. And we could also accompany them in the implementation of an infrastructure project with resilience, or in the transformation in consumption patterns of power consumption for urban transportation. Those are options countries may have. So we need to have that flexibility. Work with customers, the countries, at different levels. They also need to work with the private sector, productive sector, and the NGOs and foundations. So we've started a work from 2 years now, almost 2.5 years now, 2 years exactly, and then September 1st we began last year, generating progress and projects towards that aim, helping us in the adaptation part, motivation, and protection of natural capital. And with Alicia Montalvo, with the team, we associated with All the Wear and Comfort Life International, which are the two big birth protection NGOs to work in the migration birds corridors. I came from Cartagena from to Santa Marta with the team. It's inevitable to think about that space and reminding us about the first pages to leave to tell the story. What was the Ciénaga? How was the moorland like? When how he was 18 years old. He crossed the Ciénaga from Maracataca. And that narration of this wetlands does not exist now. It was liquidated in one generation. If possible, we need to regenerate. It is possible, but it involves a lot of things, some changes in the way of frame of mind, in the way of acting, and also we will have to have our contributions, including development banks. So this has been the bet in which CAF has been transiting for over 2 years now. We've titled this bank, when we have to be the green bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, in betting on sustainable and inclusive growth in the region. We also came from Cartagena, from closing a very important commitment, which Finance in Common. Finance in Common gathers development banks, most of them throughout the world, and from all continents. This is the fourth meeting we had of this summit. So the first one in Latin America and the Caribbean. So all of you who were there participating in Finance in Common in Cartagena from Monday to Wednesday to better understand how we could do so these banks can do more to stop and hinder and solve the climate crisis we have. A crisis that's financial, fiscal, from some countries in the region because of the high level of indebtedness. So as a result of the pandemics, our states and governments are basically paralyzed because of the debt. To the islands in the Caribbean are affected only by the COVID-19 because they lost tourism. But apart from that, natural events from the last 10 years have increased 60-70% the relation of debt on the PGD. So natural event, and so they have reduced, undermined the capacity to respond. So to see ourselves not as isolated banks, but an ecosystem of development banks that mobilizes today 12% of financing of world development, we should be able to grow more and catalyze more to provide solutions for governments and accompany more the private sector and work more with civil society. In that effort, we've been doing these last 3 days in Cartagena. Next week will be in Santiago de Compostela in an activity the bank itself proposed from a year since. So the ministers from economy and finance get together from Latin America and the Caribbean and Europe. A third of them of the World Bank and the Monetary Fund, so organized with the purpose, it's reflect on the financial global architecture and how we could stop this problem. This is not a problem that's going to be solved with one individual action or family action. It's going to accumulate, but governments have to have a bigger effort, and banks have to make a bigger effort to provide a solution, and that discussion is going to be had next week. Not only is it going to be enough to be more financing by the CAF side, we go follow up on the customers, even doing that is not going to be enough. And that's the size of the challenge we have. What we've generated in the last years, so economic growth has gone. It's happening now. It's invoicing us now. We don't deal now with warnings. We have consequences now. And this implies fast answer from society in the 25 years to come, but acting now. That's the reason by which CAF submits this report today. It's not any report. It's not just another report. It's a report that aligns the effort from the bank, and we are translating it already into action. And preparation for programs, preparation of projects. And for the Colombian case, I can mention some of the things we're doing, and this is what the team here, Alicia and Christian, by the closing of the activity, could reflect on to those programs we have today in the country. And they refer, for example, to the adaptation of agriculture and cattle raising in Colombia. It's pretty advanced with the Green Climate Fund. Alicia and Rodrigo are representatives in Colombia. You may also talk about that. The preparation of watering districts for rural communities, of course, in the electromobility in the cities. We've been working close hand in hand with the mayor's office in Bogota with the expansion of the metro. It's a solution in mitigation, and we need to continue towards that way, identifying programs and projects to help the country make the transition as it corresponds. But especially reflecting from the side of the bank, this week I'll do it here, is to understand that we have to push accompany governments from the region in Latin America and the Caribbean in the efforts in the discussion of the global financial architecture to solve climate changes. That's what is missing today, to have clarity, to concretize, to increase the capacity to respond of the governments, the development banks, to answer these climate change crisis. With this, I just wanted to welcome you. Oh, I have a lot of familiar faces here, some friends from childhood, from high school. So we're here not by chance. This is a land that's blessed by God and by nature. Danilo knows about this. He was in the team today. I could not be there. So I want to be there in November or December because we have the Sierra, the Ciénaga, the river, natural parks, we have Ramsar areas, biosphere reserves. This is a confluence of all types of protections, special sensibility, not because I'm from Santa Marta, okay. So I'm kidding, but not. But I'm serious anyway. So when we were discussing with the team where we would present these, where there were many ideas, so I just have one. I think, I'm not going to suggest much to go, but I think that Santa Marta could be a place. Here we are. I don't think there's a better place to display this report. We're going to be... Thank you. Next year, we are going to be in the process from this and coming year to show this report throughout the continent. We're going to be showing it at COP28. Alicia is going to be there with the team. We are going to have it in Morocco. So this is the whole team who made this possible, CAF team. Sansinelli, our vice president, leading this troop, as we say it, knowledge troop, and the operational part. Our representative in Colombia, Rodrigo Peñalillo, as well. Thank you very much. All of you who have come, and our international guests as well. I want to greet especially Mayor Literoy, who's here, Professor Pablo Marquez, Professor of Ecology from Chile Catholic University. Our panelists, of course, Javier Juana and Mr. Sanabria, who's going to be with us, not by chance, but because the Vice Minister of Development. Okay, I'm just kidding, but I'm not kidding. She loves this land. But if we've learned something from Sandra, really, is the value of protecting the mangrove and blue economy. We learned a lot from Sandra by listening to her some years ago, along with Isabel and Claudia and Carlos around the protection of Ciénaga. I also want to thank you for your presence here as a development bank. And of course, to our host, who is Captain Francisco Arias, thank you for having us today here. I'm about to close. We came exactly in the year of the pandemic, February, like by the end of January, beginning of February 2020. We wanted to have an activity here with our brother bank, with the BID, and the dream was to have good alliance of development banks with research institutes that Latin America and the Caribbean have. Then the pandemics came, it brought along a lot of things. I quit BID and I came here, so I'm going to be working now with CAF. This is the first time we have a multilateral bank working here at Inbemar. And I just wanted to say, as I told Christian, today Inbemar, tomorrow Fondo Marino, Aquarium Foundation of Santa Marta, looking at repopulation of coral reef process and total participation. We need to continue working with your Vice Minister in that. We're ready with our mind, open heart, and also the wallet there. But to work together, to do things in benefit of the country and the region. Use this learning and share it with Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you, Sandro, to be with us. And the whole team of the ministry wanted to thank you for your presence and flexibility for being with us today in this presentation. Thank you very much.
Espectacular, pues muchísimas.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for being with us this afternoon. Now we invite The company, as it was previously said, we're going to call here Captain Francisco Arias, who's the General Director of INVEMAR. And today he opened the door of these premises. The floor is yours, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you for your introduction. So this is a very moving moment. I really want to thank you for having chosen this institute to launch this report. The relevance this report has for the region and all of those who are going to be affected positively by this new vision of CAF Bank. And probably we're going to feel it and appreciate it for the rest of the days. We hope so. When Eduardo Campos called me, he told me, Captain, let's launch that we want it to be at the Institute. Not only was it a pretty interesting issue to have continued with this talk we had in February 2020. Immediately I said, okay, we're going to support it. Let's take it. And then he told me, why don't you share a little bit, how is it, what's the story of that building behind? What's the story behind that building? As a reference element of why we are there and the things the national government does. I said, okay, I think it's good idea. Instead of having technical issues and so what we do in science and things like that, I said, okay, I'm going to share a little bit our background. We have other elements, of course, that could contribute to the vision of what could be a change in paradigm, for example, in coastal architecture. Architecture in a city like Santa Marta, for example, we have some urgencies and need. The first thing I want to share with you, for those of you who do not know, what does INVEMAR do? Okay, what is it about? I always like to say that it was an institutional bet. It was unique that Colombia made at that moment when they designed Law 99, which is really an example in terms of institutional assembly as a country, having a leader of an environmental policy in the nation, having some autonomous entities, with all these effects in certain pros and cons. So it's a bet for the region that's interesting, which are the autonomous regional corporations, and some technical branches that today are the support element of criteria of that's robust in knowledge of science, so that the ministry that takes those decisions in policies with the corporations in the execution of that regional policy could support themselves on the information, on science, so that perhaps all those decisions may have the highest level of certainty and the minimum level of uncertainty. Within these, we created 4 institutions that are called, like, followed, not registered to the ministry, which are Sinchi, Humboldt, and the Continental Territory, the Pacific Research Institution, in charge of special knowledge in terms of ethnicity, and INVEMAR, so which has the responsibility to understand half of the national territory. So sometimes we forget about that. Colombia has 1,134,000 square kilometers of continental territory, and around 1 million square kilometers in jurisdictional maritime land. That's another country. We forget about that. They also have mountains, valleys, and all that. They have also the landscape. Even some that are deeper than the highest of our mountains. This is an institutional challenge, but thanks to the special configuration design in Law 99 of there should be corporations, non-for-profit organizations linked to the Ministry of Environment, with administrative autonomy and ruled by the private law. That has allowed us to have what we have today in terms of infrastructure development and capacities and coverage. Okay, this building, this morning I said that the first house of a pretty illustrious guest's house was the one that Ibebal used in 30 years in Punta Latin. Was the house, and the people from Santa Marta know the history of their city. Now, really, the ones that are adopted and adapted with all of the wonders of being already locals, and they share with us those stories that was built in the 50s when the president was General Rojas Pinilla and the governor was Hernandez. Pardon, right? And then he was Ministry of Defense General. He built the house so that the president may come to take some holidays in the summertime. That the original house is here in Punta Betin. And because of fate, the institution occupied with some kind of a lease contract. So in my office in the mornings, I like getting there early. But there I got there earlier to see the sun rays, and then I stayed until late to see the sunset. So it's a wonderful place. But with a series of difficulties that in the end led us to see how to get rid of Punta Latin. So on that exit had various determinants. One, to have an emblematic site in Punta Latin that could not be something different to offering the city and the country other new emblematic site. The second point was that one of the reasons for which we had to move were the difficulties in the environmental management of an activity with which we worked together, which had to do with coal management and caused some harm. The third point was that to go to Invemar, we had to go through 20 security filters, check out, have boots, helmets, and reflective vests to register as prior to that to see if the person was trustworthy or not. She could go through the port because of the issues they had, and also are more difficult after 2021 with all the environmental restrictions. And the new Invemar site has to be open for the community. It has to be part of the city. It needs to allow people to get to the institute. And the last one, which was conditioning, the strongest one, that was to having that process, the building should be environmentally sustainable. Could be an example for cities architecture, so that we can have works with an environmental criterion that had some special characteristics, so they could perhaps be, let's say, taken as a reference, so that the rest of works, at least, I said, in the public sector, had those considerations and environmental determinants. In the end, we got to this work, to this place that I briefly shared with you. Everyone said, okay, how is it that you have this building sidewards and not north-south, east-west of most of streets in the systems of development of the Colombian cities? So the building is set sideways, so first to get away from the sun, so you could take the least radiation possible from the thermal effect of the sun, and second, that would catch dominant winds from the northwest, which is one of the environmental wonders of our region. That blue thing around it, what is that? Well, it also has aesthetic sense, colors, the sea, the depth, the clear, the dark, the light. But that is a skin that we call, first, it's a barrier for radiation that reduces temperature of the building. It's porous, and through it, wind flows. The one that we had in the orientation of the building. And third, it diffracts light. Internally, the building is kind of a show stand. You can see it. And in the day, offices, they do not need to turn on the lights, because the light that's distributed throughout the building allows us to work with very little need or requirement to have Of course, reducing our impact from the energetic standpoint. The common areas in the building are open. Thanks to that hug given by the wind, and temperature is reduced. We only have air conditioning in the working area when only strictly required, like laboratories and offices. Fourth, the water system of the building recycles its water. Santa Marta is a city that has deep water access problems. The Institute, all its waters of condensation of air conditioning or you can recycle, they are reinjected in the sewer system, and recycling and reducing the footprint, the environmental print we leave. The roofing is so we reduce temperature and we capture water by humidity that's recycled. Some other things that are interesting of the facades of the institute are cement at site. So a ton of cement have 700 cements of CO2 in the atmosphere for its production or process. So the surface there would require, as we say, in Santa Marta, you have to plaster them. So it's like 7,000 square meters of surface that we do not plaster. We do not cover it with any type of plaster. We do not paint them. So with that, we save the planet a good amount of CO2 burden. The building is 1.5 meters above the estimated increase of sea level. So we consider, for example, that for the work. In Punta Betin, we had 2,500 square meters of operation areas, laboratories, and this time we have 1,200 square meters totally usable for science of the environmental system needs and Colombia's needs and the world needs in marine investigation issues. So one of the criteria we wanted to leave in that list of determinants for the work had to do with the Institute B, a thought center, a meeting point of science of those who were interested in the sustainable development of our nation and the world. And part of that criterion was concretized in these facilities, auditorium, and well, all the facilities that we have here at your service of these events as well. And as I said at the beginning, I am really thrilled. I'm very motivated that we are achieving that point. Some days we had an encounter with indigenous communities for the closing and definition of the black line of that state commitment made with our communities from the Sierra. We were here with all the indigenous authorities some years ago, with scientific authorities of the buildings, of the oceans, some world events we were performing already. Our training efforts of scientists and with the doctorate program in marine sciences to generate capacities at local level, and our commitment with UNESCO to be the training center for oceans in Latin America and all these Spanish-speaking countries. And little by little, consolidate that criterion. So, thank you, Mr. President, for the bank for having remembered our talk in February. This is going to be your house, everyone's house, your meeting point of marine sciences in the country, the region, and the world, perhaps. We are at your service. Thank you very much.
Gracias, capitán. Sí, creo que
Thank you, Captain. So we could not choose a better place to have this event after all those descriptions. All that has been shared here. Well, honestly, we were thrilled. So quickly, Let me remind you that we are having a streaming in live through our social media. If you want to comment something, you can do it perfectly. Many of you have your cell phones with you. You follow us in at Agenda CAF on Facebook, X, and also in Instagram. And hashtag, you can use it is number RedCAF. So we're gonna give the presentation now of this report of economy and development, which we stuck global challenges, regional solutions in Latin America and the Caribbean regarding climate change and biodiversity. For this, in this moment, to present this report, we are going to ask Pablo Braciolo and Ricardo Estrada, both main economists in CAF. Pablo Braciolo is a doctor in economy by the Pompeu Fabra University from 2012, master in economics by the same university. Ricardo Estrada, on his hand, he graduated in doctorate in economy from Paris School of Economics, of a master in public policy of the University of Chicago. So we welcome them with a great round of applause.
Hola, buenas.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Ricardo Estrada. Hi, I am Pablo Raciolo. Today we'll be talking about the climate crisis and biodiversity, of the impacts of this crisis for Latin America and the Caribbean. We're going to be doing it from the regional perspective and for the region. Among other things, this means that we're going to be talking about one crisis. Many times we listen to hear about talking about climate change and biodiversity as two separated phenomena. And we think, as we put it in the report, that in a region with the Latin American characteristics, with all the resources, abundance of biodiversity, with the integration of production and productive activity to these resources, and the loss, both climate change and loss of biodiversity are two things of the same, two spaces of the same coin. Starting by talking about how climate change affects us. So, one of the main manifestations of climate change are meteorological events that are extreme. Each year in Latin America and the Caribbean, more than 7 million people are affected by cyclones, by fires, by floodings, droughts, and landslides. All that type of phenomena affecting the population in our system. So this is more frequent and intense. I'm going to show you an example. We're going to see the case of heat waves in the region. What we can see here on the right-hand side on the bars is that in the 80s, in any year, in the 80s, 37 of 100 cities in the country had at least one heat wave, and 5 cities had at least one heat wave that was severe. I mean, it's severe, it's more intense, higher temperature, and longer in time. Now we're going to see how this changed in the last 4 years. So I'm going to see the map here. You're going to see how those heat waves changed. The map has circles that indicate that city had a heat wave, and the color of the indicates the intensity of the heat. The darker, the more intense was the heat wave. So we see how this changed in the last 4 years.
Por supuesto.
Of course, there is a natural variability year after year, but you could see how they are more intense, more frequent. If we summarize this data in the last decade, the probability of having a heat wave in the city, 60% of houses had heat waves in 1 year in the last decade, and 40% of the cities had severe heat waves, almost doubled the possibility in the city, and with triple-fold the possibility to have a severe heat wave. Extreme heat has consequences for the health, especially for more vulnerable groups, for the senior citizens, for the children, lower income population, and extreme heat also has consequences for productivity in some sectors, in economic sectors, for example, in agriculture, where they lose a lot of working hours because they cannot, it's too hot, you cannot perform your activities in the outdoors. So in the construction process as well, in the building, it also affects the cognitive capacity of his children. It has some consequences. I'll give you now another example. Conditions of climate change continuously and temperatures increase, rain are more less predictable, and the drought increases. So projections within this report indicate that temperature will continue increasing, rain will become less predictable, and the drought is going to continue throughout the region. So this is the context. When we talk about the drought, the desert. So these areas were considered like dry or type of desertic areas. On the right, you can see the percentage of the surface of each one of these sub-regions. They are arid. So in South America, the desertness has increased 41% in the Caribbean. But let's see how this drought is projected towards the future for 2040, 60, and 100 in a high emission level scenario. So how would that change in the region? As you can see, this is a very considerable increase, particularly in some zones like the Caribbean. The drought is going to be duplicated. 80% of lands in the Caribbean are going to be dry in 2100 if we continue with this level of emission. This is a very important increase. This reflects a particularity of the impacts of climate change. They're very heterogeneous and they vary in many dimensions. And a very important dimension is location. Of course, aridity and the increase of temperature, as the lack of water, they are a problem for agricultural production. We are a food production zone. We are one of the main exporters of food in the world. Therefore, these projections tell us that we could have problems or potential threats for problems or causing problems for the countries like the droughts. They have macroeconomic important impacts in some countries also. Aridity is a threat for food security and nutrition security of small producers, particularly in rural areas with low income in Central America and the Caribbean. With those two examples, because of time restraints, we cannot be more exhaustive in the impacts of climate change. In the book, we analyze other impacts in many dimensions. Talking about Imbemar, we say something like, with respect, how ocean conditions change and that affects coral reef, also problems with basic infrastructure and many other impacts. Now we'll be talking about how the loss of biodiversity affects us. To talk about the loss of biodiversity, it is useful to acknowledge that Latin America and the Caribbean, they keep an extraordinary level of richness in ecosystems and biodiversity. 6 of the 17 countries considered as mega diverse in the world are in the region, including, of course, Colombia. This richness, this natural capital, is being lost at an accelerated rate. A way to observe, to see this loss, is by analyzing the proportion of the continent, of the surface, continental surface, that's conserved in natural status or semi-natural. We can see here in this map in colors. In 1800s, basically all of the continent was in natural status or semi-natural status. Nevertheless, as of that year, and especially from 1900s, the situation is going to change a lot, as you can see now. The loss of coverage is high at a rate of that it's equivalent to the surface of Panama per year. What does that imply? In 2017, we still have the recent data. Only 48% of the surface of South America is natural or semi-natural. Only 19% of the Caribbean and 27% of Central America. So something important is that the loss of natural coverage is pretty strong associated with the loss of biodiversity. That's the habitat of biodiversity. Within this concerning scenario, there are some positive parts that we keep, for example, big extensions of natural coverage, including the Amazon forests, which hosts primary forests, the most extensive one in the world. So, I mean, despite of the fact we've lost a lot, we still keep a, comparatively speaking, great richness level. Now, deforestation, the loss of biodiversity, or generally speaking, the degradation of ecosystems, affects services that they offer to people. They affect ecosystemic services. And these ecosystemic services are key for quality of human life and the possibilities of economic development. Some of these services are tightly related with the answer to climate change. Ecosystems are a source of mitigation before climate change. Natural coverage absorb CO2 from the atmosphere and deposit them in the biomass and in the soil. The forests in Latin America contribute to 15% of the yearly capture of CO2 from the atmosphere. 15% of the total. Practically, that's around 1.1 gigatons of carbon. Importantly enough, the degradation of ecosystems has generated that the productivity in our forests capturing carbon could be really low. What does that mean? If we had a better forestry management, we could potentialize this contribution from the region to the world. Ecosystems also offer multiple services of adaptation towards climate change. And being in Magdalena and Santa Marta, it's a good pretext to show the example of the mangroves. Mangroves are part of our natural barriers that protect coastal population from floodings. As we can see here in this map, mangroves are abundant in the Caribbean, in Central America, and northern part of Brazil. And mangroves decrease the height of waves caused by cyclones in 60%, and those caused by wind in 31%. Each year in Latin America, the mangroves decrease the loss attributed to floodings because in $12 billion, and they protect 1 million people. The ecosystemic services offer many other benefits that are important for the economic activity. I'm going to give you just one example that has to do with the natural pollinizers, so insects, because other animals are important pollinizers, and that includes the bees. Bees pollinize a high variety of crops in the region, the avocado, coffee, cocoa, papaya, and pumpkin, and many other vegetables and grains. So in total, we think that the value of this contribution is of about 30% of the production value of crops pollinized by the bees. That's the dimension. Generally speaking, we're just giving some examples of the multiple services that nature offers people. And that includes the regulation of climate, the water cycle, production of food, so, and that also source of identity, etc. And it's at stake. And that's what's at stake when biodiversity is at stake. In perspective, the Industrial Revolution and economic growth allowed an increase and the quality of life and hope of life, hope expectation, I mean, of hundreds of thousands of people. So the common citizen today has a much longer life and healthier life and has access to goods and services that were not conceived 200 years ago. However, along with that, this process generated the climate crisis and biodiversity that is taking our time now. Not everything is taken for granted, so we're still in time to act and reverse the most concerning scenarios from the climate and biodiversity standpoint, retaking the pathway of sustainable development, economically speaking. But I need to talk about that. We need to act now. Regarding its urges, it is key to understand how we generate climate change and how we generate the ecosystem degradation. In this way, we could think of public policies that would contribute in the recovery of this situation. Let's talk a little bit about how human activity generates climate change and ecosystems degradation. We've seen so far how climate change has an impact in the ecosystems and affects both the population as well and also the biodiversity. We see the importance of biodiversity and ecosystemic services both to regulate the climate as well to adapt to climate change impacts and also as an input for the own economic development process in the region. We're going to see how human activity generates climate change and how human activity generates degradation and of ecosystems and loss of biodiversity. And for that, we need to talk about greenhouse gas emission. So climate change is produced as a consequence of the release into the atmosphere of greenhouse effect gases. Latin America generates nearly 10% of greenhouse global effects. But which are the activities those emissions come from? We see that emissions in Latin America and the Caribbean come mainly from agropecuary, agricultural activities, different to what happens in the developed world. Here we have data of emissions. We can see here the bulk of emissions in the region come from this sector, which is agro. So we talk silviculture, agriculture, and other uses of land. That explains 58% of emissions. This sector has two subsectors. One sector which is called for use of land, which is the reflective what it was shown by Ricardo green coverage laws. That implies changes in the use of land. That implies emissions, and those emissions are 38 points of these 58. And that, yes, to simplify, we could call it deforestation. We could think about deforestation is one of the main causes of emissions in the region. The change of use of soil implies 38% of emissions in the region, 38 versus 58. The other 20 explained by agropecuary practices like cattle raising, rice plantation, the use of fertilizers. The rest of sectors are less relevant in the region in the generation of emissions, the provision of power, energy, transportation, industry, and buildings. So this composition of emissions is very different to the developed world. In developed countries, the main generator of emissions is the provision of power, with 36% of emissions, and transportation 25%, the industry 21%, and buildings 10%. So we put all those sectors together, linked to the use and production of energy from fossil origin. So nearly that's almost 50% from the developed countries, which is different to our region. Understanding composition of emissions and identifying the activities that generate the most emissions is key to direct efforts of mitigation. Now, deforestation or the change of the use of soil for agropecuary activities is also the main degradation channel of ecosystems in Latin America and the Caribbean. You can see in this map, we already knew about that, 46%, 45% of the surface of the region is kept in a natural or semi-natural manner. So what about the 56, 55%, the rest? They have a predominant use that is a tropic. So 16% to crops, 35% to cattle grazing, and 4% to human settlements. That is to say that in total, 51% of region's surface is devoted to agro-industrial activities. Today we are in the Department of Magdalena. This figure for Magdalena is 73%. We've established the main activities by which we generate emissions and we degrade the ecosystem. So in the report we talk about other activities. Today we focused in the main ones. So regardless of which should be, it is good to understand that these activities are the consequence of market failures from the local to the global. So the market imbalances, the externalities at local level make it complex. I mean, it increases the complexity of the situation we're discussing. Regardless if the country they will reduce the use of fossil fuel or reduces deforestation, it doesn't matter where it's given. We have this reduction. Everyone in the world will benefit from that. For the accumulation of greenhouse effect gases into the atmosphere, we don't have an origin. Everything goes up. What does that mean? That efforts for mitigation taken from each country and frequently they pay the countries, they benefit the rest of the world without, regardless if there should be a contribution or no, to these efforts. These requires, and it makes it visible, the importance, the relevance of a robust of international effort to solve the crisis of climate change and biodiversity. Regarding this particular issue, we found vaccines. We have some advances here. These advances are international negotiations in terms of biodiversity and climate change. We've had mainly through separate pathways and at different paces. Most of advances are seen in the climate part, with the sign of Paris Accord. This is a milestone because of the addition almost universal of countries, and because we managed to reach a consensus there. Those challenges around maintaining or keeping climate change and global warming in 2 grades in the pre-industrial area and 1.5 degrees less, that's going to allow us to avoid the environmental catastrophe. Nevertheless, the Paris Accord has its defects. 3, and it's not designed so that the total of contributions, voluntary contributions of countries, reach the level of reduction required to comply with the objective for meeting that goal. Second, despite the fact that in the Accord we acknowledge the principle of differentiated responsibilities, there is not a discussion on our mechanisms enough to debate what to do with climate justice. Nor is there in place the definition of mechanisms as of how we're going to mobilize the financing, internationally speaking, required to meet the goals. Well, we'll talk about policies now. What can we do? Climate change and environmental crisis requires a change in consumption and production. And Latin America and the Caribbean, we are not aloof from that. So we are more impacted by that too. Nevertheless, this crisis is not any moment of frailty from the social and economic standpoint, which a very low economic growth in the last years and very scarce social inclusion. Some data. Economic growth in the last 60 years, just to have a long-term vision, we've grown at a 1.56% per capita per year, which is a rate below the world average and very, very low compared to developed countries. So we have a challenge there, how to improve productivity of economies and promote growth. As of social inclusion, we know we are the most unequal region in the planet, on the planet, and even with the advances we reached, in the first part of this century, inequality is still very high. An indicator of low growth and high inequality, we have 30% of our population are in extreme poverty. In this context, the region has to think about its climate agenda, environmental agenda, and for policies to respond to climate crisis. And this agenda implies several investments, reallocation of resources among productive sectors. So, and that's going to generate conflicts. So, and also for countries, and that's going to be to solve some conflicts. We need to look for a balance to have and reach growth with sustainability and inclusion. In the report, we defined 5 priorities to guide policies that should be part of this agenda regarding climate change and environmental change. So the first priority for the region has to be the adaptation. We saw that the region is very vulnerable to the climate change effects. Therefore, focus efforts in adaptation is key as a priority. Adaptation, on the one hand, has synergies with the economic growth and social inclusion. So the impacts of climate change are greater in groups and population and most vulnerable people. Socioeconomical vulnerability derives into climate vulnerability, so it's a priority to increase efforts in adaptation processes and focus them in most vulnerable groups. Otherwise, climate change is going to exacerbate inequalities existing in an already unequal region. Adaptation has synergies with growth because when we strengthen resilience in territories, so we are attracting investment and we are also working in growth. I have some lands that are floodable, and we build infrastructure there that would avoid flooding, or we recover the mangroves, so we saw to avoid floodings. That land will increase value and an investment. In the report, we discussed a series of adaptation policies, one of the characteristics of impacts of climate change, which are very heterogeneous, and therefore the responses and adaptation policies should be conceived within a specific context for a specific population, and then we have a variety of policies. Some of them highlight we have nature-based solutions, so resilient agricultural practices, adaptation structure, and prevention and risk management in front of disasters. One of the policies that's relevant in the region, as mentioned by the President at the beginning, are the practices and techniques of resilient agriculture. For example, the conservation crops, the rotation of crops, the conservation of seeds resistant to high temperatures, or lack of water, or the pests. Evidence shows that adopting those practices is profitable, even from the private standpoint. The farmer who adopts those practices will benefit, and at the same time, he will adapt and contribute to mitigate, and with having other benefits. So those practices are not being adopted at the pace they should be done. Partly because there are some problems of lack of information, finance.
Por ejemplo, tenemos que, para hacer siembra directa,
Sometimes we have some problems. We have to buy an equipment, and it's not possible. So how would I benefit from that? In that sense, it's important to have the initiative that was mentioned at the beginning, where CAF is supporting, introducing and promoting agricultural practices in Colombia from a resilient standpoint. The second priority is to contribute to the global mitigation. As Ricardo said, the Paris Accord requires everyone to reduce emissions. And something we can see is the Paris Accord, if we do not all contribute to that reduction of emissions, it's not going to be possible to reach the goals. Therefore, all regions need to mitigate, even those who have emitted even less, like the Caribbean and Latin America. The region has set forth a reduction in 10% for 2030 compared to 2015. So that's a very important ambition, and also all of the countries will have to increase. But we need to mitigate it. When we looked at the emission structure in the region, priority number one to reduce emissions is to stop deforestation. And in Latin America and the Caribbean, that requires to have sustainable agro-industrial sector, because deforestation comes from the need to expand the planting frontier, so to provide food, and also because of the demand of food, and that is going to be kept in the future. So the way to meet it is to be by being more productive without having much pressure on the border, natural border. So stop deforestation and increase productivity. The region has to advance in an energetic transition as well. It has some costs, and they're distributed. So it depends on the production structures in the country, energetic matrices, and the assets and the fossil resources. Therefore, we have a challenge for countries here to have that transition. The country has to find the most adequate rhythm to advance towards that energetic transition and to keep a balance in the cleanness of that power generation matrix. So this is a very important challenge there. Of course, the region has very good advantages for the eolic and solar energy. Finally, we need to reform subsidies. We have important subsidies in the region, and in the cost of power production and subsidies. So we have some impacts there. It could be regressive as well. So we have to think about compensation mechanisms to create those reforms, to have those politically feasible reforms. Finally, I would end by saying that an important step ahead is to have price and carbon taxes. Colombia has given already a step forward in that sense. So talking about the ecosystem, it is important for climate change as for our local development. So the services we provide. The report, we have a series of specific policies addressing that purpose. We point out the protected areas. The region is leader in the protected areas. 20% of the surface, land surface and marine surface is under a protected area model. We have several required aspects which we need to work so that this protection be really effective and efficient. The co-administration of natural resources with key actors offers an opportunity to balance objectives of conservation and local development. So the allocation and acknowledgement of rights to local and indigenous communities should be a central part of this agenda. We have some policies that want to use the market mechanisms to incentivize the preservation. Among these, we have the payments for ecosystemic services, in which the region also is a leader. These payments work, for example, by having water funds, in which the water users pay suppliers in the basin for actions, for conservation actions and forestry management actions that allows them to have a flow of water towards transition. Energetic transition at global level is going to open opportunities for Latin American and the Caribbean economies. On the one hand, the electric power is going to increase by critical minerals for this process. And some of these minerals are abundant in the region, like lithium and copper. So many countries in the country have a pretty high natural gas reservoirs so they could use as fuel for transition. On the other hand, carbon compensation markets or international markets could be a useful mechanism for financing to receive resources that could be used to preserve our forests and potentialize the global contribution in terms of CO2 capture. In the report, we highlight the importance of strengthening regional coordination. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we have a common history and we have common interests. Tight coordination and cooperation may potentialize our voice and our concerns in negotiations at international level. Examples of common objectives of common interest is to increase financing not only for mitigation in the current world, so here is very strong focus in mitigation, but also for adaptation to climate change and biodiversity. We have seen that we have, this is very important. Just to close, climate change and biodiversity, it's a global challenge. So the solution to this challenge is going to vary between regions and countries. In Latin America and the Caribbean, we know that biodiversity is going to be part of the solution. Specifically, each country in the region has to find the policies portfolio that suits better to the local context. The report of economy and development we have presented today wants to have an input, wants to be an input for the process. Now, it is time to act. So it's urgent to talk. Thank you very much.
Bueno, a Ricardo y a Pablo, muchísimas gracias por...
Ricardo, thank you very much for this presentation. And to comment on the report, I would like to invite now immediately, quickly, also Pablo Marquet, leading professor, director of the Department of Ecology from the Catholic Pontifical University in Chile. He's also a member of the National Academy of Science of the United States, American Academy of Arts and Science, MACAT, and the World Academy of Sciences. He's an author of more than 250 publications. It's a pleasure. Welcome, Paulo. The floor is yours. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Just to comment with this report, I'm going to be brief, but I hope that I'll be efficient. So one of the big contributions we have from this report in the development is precisely to take care of the change of paradigm, and that has to do with looking at two economists talking about biodiversity. So I say that is where we have the incarnation of the transformation required, and then the president saying, okay, this should be like, we have to have an even greener bank. That's what we need. That gives us optimism. What I want to do is to share with you a little bit how we reached to the crisis in which we are. By understanding that, we have the clues for the solutions we need. And it is there where we eventually, this report is going to be accompanying us because it gives us some clues that are essential. Let's start, okay, this is a fast trip from the origin of life. So fasten your seatbelts on this trip. First, an essential fact is that what is living changes the environment, and environment changes the living. So we are in a kind of constant dance of mutual transformation in which one example, and fundamental example of what happened 2,500 million years ago when we have the great level of oxygenation, where eventually, while we sleep and discovers, invents an innovation that is the photosynthesis through oxygen, using carbon to produce molecules that would generate energy, and at the same time release oxygen into the atmosphere. So this makes you have your partial obtention of oxygen, then we have a transformation of the atmosphere by small bacteria. They are so abundant, they're capable of transform a whole planet. And with that, we have an ozone layer. That ozone layer allows that eventually colonization of environments that was not possible because of the UV radiation. It allows the emergence of multicellular organisms. So on this phenomenon, so something that happened 2,500 million years ago. So that's why we're here in this meeting, trying to understand consequences of what our innovations are as of the atmosphere's chemistry. This has been a dance of existence where, as you see, the environment and what is living have been constantly transforming one and the other. Within this context, it is important to see also to ask ourselves the human phenomenon. It is essential. We are part of biodiversity. And then we forget about that sometimes. That is the most basic thing. We are part of that biodiversity. We think we are special. No, we are not that special. We are as special as the bacteria that change the atmosphere's chemistry. We are doing something similar. And the important point here with this graph is that you can see that 10,000 years ago, the human population increased exponentially, and then almost super exponentially. And this responds to this model I present here, which is called the socio-ecological loop. What does it have to do? It has to do with something that's very simple, that summarizes a lot what we have discussed here. I tell you this, if we're going from the left to right, so we could see biodiversity that generate agrosystemic services and contributions from nature to people, that impact the population size of human being when he was a hunter and collector, and that generates so that the populations may grow. And what happens when the population grows? So we do better what we do, which is learn one from the other. That's what we do best. Social learning that potentializes innovation, technology, and that allows to the potentialization of the flow of ecosystemic services to generate even bigger populations that eventually generates a transition of going from being hunters and collectors and nomads to more sedentary population. So that generates also other type of dynamics that is very associated with this, which are the ideological dynamics when we live in group. We need to start inventing and conceiving the world. And that is to have narratives regarding us, what we are, what the world is like, and how we want the world to be. And that narrative affects also the biodiversity and also potentializes or not the ecosystemic services flow. So eventually, if we want to change the chemical composition of the atmosphere, to change or solve crises we have, not only do we have to tackle the technological loop, okay, we have to do things better, in a more productive manner, fewer fertilizers. We need to tackle the ideological loop. We need to change the paradigm. If we do not change that part of the paradigm, the rest is going to be like it's a motor, it's an engine that would not move anything. So it moves, but it does not advance. That's what it proposes. So, and eventually, historically, since we were hunters and collectors of today, what has happened with that interaction is this size of population, and it's associated to the social learning as accumulated, to transfer innovation, potentialization of use of ecosystemic services that generate more human population. So we are just expanding the biosphere and covering all of the planet. That's where we are, and perhaps the strongest evidence we call the big acceleration. So that shows that in the 50s, all socioeconomical indicators and the trends have rocketed, and along with that, all the indicators that have to do with the work of the amount of CO2, nitrogen on the soil, and so the use of resources, etc. So we are eventually in an acceleration process that could take us eventually to a phase transition, which is something, it's a critical transition, which is also highlighted in the report. These dynamics are not linear. Sometimes small changes could generate big consequences. If I make it wrong, if I don't see that. So if I don't see it, just continue walking here, I will just fall because I don't see that there's a flight there. Therefore, if you look at the transition we've had since 1700s, we have like 700,000 people until in 2045 we're going to be more than 9 billion, and the use of the territory has changed. Most of it is not a sustainable use. Eventually, we're going to have more than 70% of the planet transformed strongly that could generate phase changes in the planet as we have it and perceive it. We don't know what it's going to be like, but it's going to be less resilient, and it's going to be able to put up with the amount of people it has. And the change in paradigm we need is precisely what's written here. So Augusta says that contemporary economic thinking doesn't acknowledge that the human economy is embedded in nature. So, because we are part of nature, and the dynamics we do are also part of the nature. There's nothing outside of nature. Where do we have anything outside of nature? So everything is within nature. So we're acknowledging. So that's one of the simple things is that costs us the most in this change of paradigm when we are part of biodiversity. In this sense, the report shows essentially in the first image where it talks about the interaction between climate change, biodiversity, and also the role the society, the industry, the economy in mitigating and interact with on this component. So when with this imbalanced, we have problems. And this is one of the key notes and one of the examples we have regarding here. Okay, regarding this particular topic is the Amazons. So why did I take this example? Because it points out key notions in this report in a way that it says, okay, not many times have I seen it so clear. See the need to coordinate at regional level. You see the Amazons there, around there, I say the countries that are part of the Amazons or who share this ecosystem. More than 10 countries perhaps. And they have territories in the Amazons. Therefore, the Amazon is not one country's problem. This is a regional problem, even more, because of its impact. It's a global problem as well. It's also a natural global capital. So there we have an important point to highlight. So as you can see here in the graph, from 85 to 2021, they have had a severe degradation level. They've had transformation in the use of the land for agriculture and cattle raising, and that it has potentialized other perturbations like fires and deforestation. What is going to happen with this? What happens when we overexplode ecosystems, they lose resilience. And effectively what we see, that was a topic of very important journals covers. In 2022, we had two publications, and they analyzed the timelines in the integrity of ecosystems in the Amazons and of the forests mainly. And eventually, they alert that we could be approaching, being close to eventually having a regime change or a tip point, what they call. That could be disastrous. So this is what happens, what has happened in the Amazons with deforestation. So we have several points, important points here. One, if you see, from 2004, it decreases 70%, I think, is what deforestation decreases thanks to PPC dam program, which articulates and coordinates the willingness from the government from the NGOs and from other organizations like indigenous communities and the private sector, and they achieved it is possible to stop deforestation. So then, with political changes, they have had some, it began increasing again. Nevertheless, what has happened leaves some consequences and footprints. So the resilience is increasingly slower now. This is what is showing in this report in 2002 in red. And the Amazons are places that they have had some problems with the integrity of the forest. But you can see in the upper graph, you see that this integrity decreases. Therefore, the capacity to regenerate the forest cover. So it alters the hydrological circle, the circulation of water in the Amazon itself and throughout the continent, of which many, like for example, the Bolivian rainy season is very strong. As simply put by our coordinators, one of the characteristics that Latin America has and the Caribbean is that one of the factors that emit the most has to do with silviculture, agriculture, and cattle raising, because they generate a series of negative externalities. Therefore, it is extremely important not only to see consequences of emissions of these activities, but also consequences for the biodiversity. There is where we have a possibility to change. Because we could change the way we do cattle raising, we could change the way we work agriculture to make it more efficient using less fertilizers and having alternative methods, etc. So what we know is that these natural production or nature-based solutions or biodiversity-based solutions, so which to use the biodiversity as our ally and fix more carbon and without losing productivity. And it's been tested that demonstrated that if you regenerate ecosystems and protect ecosystems, you revegetate, reforest ecosystems, we could reach those goals. A recent survey from Kingston in 2017 indicates that this is not only possible at a global level, but it is important in terms of carbon and also could be cost effective.
Eso es lo que
That is what eventually we need, to be able to work with nature and not against nature. So being indifferent to that now. So here in Ibemar, I wanted to bring this example here because it's always been in my heart since I discovered it. I discovered the fundamental role of the whales. So whales, you know, that they have migration processes that unite all the seas in our continent. And whales in Colombia go feed themselves in the southern part of Chile, and eventually, being there, they eat a lot, and also they also defecate a lot. So, could you imagine the amount of nutrients we have in these secretions? So they generate small blooms of algae that eventually capture carbon, potentialize the biological bomb of carbon, and eventually we have a virtuous circle. And the whale itself is equivalent to several hectares of forest. Conservation of whales is basically keeping our oceans, mitigate climate change, and generate adaptation conditions to provide also ecosystemic services for recreation. And in my country, for example, we were there, they had like whale fishing boats throughout the whole year, throughout the whole century until 1980. They killed nearly 155,000 whales. In a small country, can you imagine that? Can you imagine what happened in the world? So this is something which we could improve. And well, just to conclude, so the importance I think of, since we have this report here, where we are updated the information, we have this scenario at sub-regional level, and now it will be important to think about how could we potentialize these solutions for the region, not to lose the holistic vision, and to move towards integration generation of models that would allow us to have development scenarios in the region and see how different public policies could impact not only economic, but also biodiversity and climate change. That's where these models are fundamental. So it could contribute to coordinate, it would be great. So with other agencies to work together to predict possible scenarios. And finally, I want to talk about the global framework for biodiversity, as I proposed here. Here, there is something there. There's an article there which says perhaps we could have transnational companies on board to report their impact on biodiversity. So, okay, I hope all of the companies would report their impact on biodiversity, but not only that, but also their impact in contribution to climate change. Let's say as it is, as something that's united. So its impact in decreasing inequality. So there, I was going to be fine. Thank you very much.
Pablo, muchas gracias. Si-
Thank you very much. If you wanted to start filling yourself with phrases and words that could start building, the final message of this report would be like we will have something already. So Paula has given us some pretty special words, because I think that one way or another, the issue, the aspect of biodiversity, climate change, sustainability, sometimes apparently like it's like left in the air, and we just have kind of a bubble there, and it becomes double. We ourselves sometimes we are like in this. Those of us who are here is because we are interested in this, and I think we have a very big responsibility to by grasping each one of those words as I heard and translate them in one way or another, not only the specific level like you from the CAF standpoint, but also at other levels. So that is the key message I wanted to give you prior to starting this conversation. Because yes, we are at ease and we feel comfortable, but some people who are not feel comfortable with. That's what I talk about with this doll and like that bubble. We have many messages and words, but if we implement them, we're gonna have a pretty good specific message. So that's why I invite you to go back to the social media to write numeral hashtag redcast. So today we are willing to have our last talk. For this talk panel, we're going to give this space now to the moderator, Ernesto Sargowski, Director of Socioeconomical Research and the Management of Knowledge of CAF, Sandra Vidardi, Vice Minister of Policies and Environmental Normalization of our country, Fabio Arjona, who is the Executive Director of Conservation International, and Axel Schmidt-Grael, Mayor of Niterói. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for being here. You can be here now. We'll be starting now. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure for being here. So thank you, Sandra, Fabio, and Axel for being with us today. As the president said, 20 years ago we have been having these reports, trying to have some influence and discussion on public policies in the region, have some advocacy. Many times we deal with difficult topics to modify, like our last report has been about inequalities. And inequality is very difficult to modify. But this is something that in its difficulty as relatively we know about. Here, this report, I think it's going to have an added value for this public policymakers and all government levels, which is also to inform. Personally, I learned a lot working this report. I take the comment by Pablo. As an economist, I always prioritize the problem of economic growth and inequality even by consuming natural capital. So this report, one way or another, transformed me. I'm an economist that is self-perceived as as an environmentalist. So it's a pleasure to be here with this panel. We have Sandra Virardi, Vice Minister of Policies and Environmental Normalization in Colombia. Sandra is a doctor in ecology and environment from the Madrid Autonomous University, and she has a lot of experience as a professor, researcher in Magdalena and Andes universities. Was part of the working team in different Humboldt Institute and the Adaptation Fund. Thank you, Sandra. We have Fabio Arjona, the Vice President of Conservation International of Colombia, where he has promoted different initiatives like Natura Amazonas, CESI, our future forest, mangrove life career includes positions as ex-CEO of the Autonomous Regional Corporation in Sinú and San Jorge, Director of the Forestry Plan for Colombia, and manager for the purpose of different projects. Axel Schmidt Gael, with him I apologize because I'm speaking Spanish and not Portuguese. He's the mayor of Niterói. He's a forest engineer and a public manager. He was the director of the State Institute of Forests, and he was Deputy Secretary of Environment of Rio de Janeiro State. You want to have a short talk? I apologize because we have a timing problem that sometimes it happens. Therefore, we have a soccer game, and I kindly ask you, I apologize, but we're going to have 4 minutes for each one of you in your answers. So I wanted to start with Sandra. Sandra, the report highlights the importance of adaptive policies for Latin America and the Caribbean. And for its design, it points out the relevance of generated diagnosis and making national strategies for adaptation. From the ministry's standpoint, which are the sectors that identify as those with greater level of vulnerabilities regarding climate change, and which are the biggest challenges Colombia faces in terms of adaptation. So thank you very much, Kev, for the invitation. And I want to congratulate you for the report. I'm going to take 30 seconds. This is a report that is very symbolic that the Bank of Development is submitting it in these terms. Terms in which for decades scientists have insisted on and have raised a red light. Now, I am not a vice minister, I am an academic and a scientist. I thank you deeply because this is what we need to integrate knowledge systems. And science has been warning us with figures from the intergovernment panels on climate change and biodiversity and ecosystemic services. Thanks for taking the leadership and integrating this and concretizing it for the continent and translate it to a language for decision makers, which has been so difficult, really. Thank you very much, and congratulations to the team who made this report possible. So, understanding the spirit of the report, I am part of, Professor, it was good to see you, because I'm also from the socio-ecological systems. Talking about vulnerable sectors is not the most pertinent. We need to talk about vulnerable territories, because in a territory, all of the sectors there are going to be vulnerable. So if we have a territorial approach to vulnerability, undoubtedly, it's going to help us much more to make decisions in public spheres and to make it much more in detail. So I cannot, for example, have public policies for adaptation or transformation of systems that are perhaps the systems with the greatest need to transform, and also for the Caribbean region than for the moorland or the high Andean mountains. So I need to have a whole package of climate adaptation per territory. It's not the same to have a package for the coast, that, for example, Santa Marta, where we are, where the increase of sea level, the increase of temperature, the decrease and variability of rain is going to increase than, for example, to do what I'm going to have to do for regions like Mocoa in the Andean border. So their challenges, perhaps the most important ones, are how we conceive and we acknowledge the vulnerability in terms of the territory and the territorial capacities. So it is there with one of the big investment processes in the development is strengthening capacities to distinguish challenges like the ones we have, that the ones we have in our countries, which are so heterogeneous. So, so one of the most greatest, most heterogeneity. So we get the biodiversity, and difficult enough, we're going to find that in the planet. You're going to find a planet in which you have three mountainous systems in just one place. So in just one place, in isolated systems. So this complexity require regional perspective. So I changed the question, I'm sorry. Instead of sectors, territories. And the territories, I'm going to answer that. The territory today with the highest climate vulnerability is the Caribbean region. Because we have the zone with the greatest loss of forests. We have the desertification processes are more advanced. The increase of sea level is right there. So the whitening of coral reefs and the loss of corals is just around the corner. The saddest part is that regeneration and change processes are being more resistant than in other parts of the country. Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Interesting. I wanted to ask now Mayor Mr. Grael. In the report and in the presentation, they analyzed impacts climate change have in the cities, which include, for example, the heat waves and the increase in the risk of flooding. And an answer has been nature-based solutions that may help improve adaptation regarding these risks, and also at the same time they can contribute to the local development. I wanted to ask you about the experience in Niterói about these issues. Thank you very much. I would like also to apologize because I cannot speak Spanish. So I understand very well, but if I was going to speak, I could kind of tangle you in a row. So I wanted to thank you, CAF, for the opportunity for being here, and especially to thank CAF because of the partnership with the city of Niterói. So we have a project that's innovative that has been developed in the city of Niterói. And in 2014, the city of Niterói underwent a climate disaster. We had a lot of heavy rains, and more than 100 people lost their lives in a pretty intense rain that lasted basically one day, but it caused more than 100 deaths. So since that point in 2010 is where these rains took place. So 2013 we began a big investment in resilience in the city. The city with we had something similar here like in Santa Marta. So we have a coastal area, we have a mountain area, and Niterói is part of a metropolitan area of Rio de Janeiro. So it is a city that, despite of being in the heart of the metropolis in Rio de Janeiro, so we belong to the periphery. So we are at the heart. We have 56% of our territory is protected by conservation units or recovery stage areas, or protected by the local government or regional government. So together with the CAF, we developed a project of development we call Oceanic Sustainable Region Program. So this is the region that grows the most in Niterói, and we developed there a project, the integrated project involving sustainable mobility to infrastructure, generally speaking, urban infrastructure, sanitation, and Niterói is the fourth best city in sanitation in Brazil, and a program of protection and recovery of ecosystems. There we implemented the Parqueol Gratilinda, which is a biggest investment in nature-based solution. Today, all the drainage that comes from all the sewers that comes from the city, before it gets to the Pirachininga to Ipaiku, it goes through a system of filters, artificial filters, of course. So we call them filtering gardens. So the visitor, when he goes there to know the park, to visit the park, already sees gardens, but these gardens have the function to filter the water, retaining sediments and nutrients prior to them getting to the lake, to the lagoon system with these natural systems. So, to add any chemical product and without the expenditure of energy, they already transform the water that gets there and water that leaves the system for the lagoon system, everything within the standards of vulnerability foreseen by the National Council of Environment. So we're still working on that with the parameter only phosphorus, but it's showing the efficiency of the system. So I just wanted to finish saying that both the regional program and the Sustainable Oceanic Region and when the Pirachininga Park with
já vem colecionando
nature-based solutions, they've collected awards in Brazil and abroad. Today, last year, the Sustainable Oceanic Program region, we received the best project award for urban sustainability in the Americas. So we already have so the park was also awarded in France. It was a finalist in Berlin and in several awards in Brazil. So it's an honor to present this before you. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Congratulations for everything. Well, all those programs have brought along. Thank you very much. That's interesting. I wanted to ask you now, Fabio. In the presentation, you talked about the consequences of climate change in several dimensions, including the rainfall and the effect both on the variability in the rain as well as in the possibility to have more droughts, and they could be more prolonged. So, in the Colombian case, the moorlands, the páramos, they have a pretty important role in the water provision. So, almost three-quarters of the population of the country supplies themselves from water coming from those ecosystems of high mountain. Which adaptation actions would be desirable to adopt, thinking about that key ecosystem to minimize the impact of climate change in these water resources? First off, thank you very much for the invitation to this important. Congratulations for that presentation, Professor. Really, I really liked your presentation. Okay, pretty aggressive in terms of the fact that conventions as of 3 years ago, biodiversity and climate change, they didn't talk about that. Two different topics. So it was adaptation, mitigation. So everything was based in that eternal discussion. Integration of the report and the vision of the president. Being here in this building, I've heard Captain talk about this for about 30 times. I've heard the same story, but I like it because I participated when I was president of the Institute Board of Directors, and because I saw the evolution of what this has been. It's a wonderful scenario, specifically regarding the moorlands or páramos. So these are global challenges, regional solutions. Sometimes we have global challenges and we have local solutions that could have an incidence in a regional and global level. That's why I'll have just one specific example of climate change adaptation and resilience, which is Bogota. Bogota is a city that's away from the commercial access on the planet. It's industrial. city. So it's a half of many things. Okay, it's the administrative center for the government. I am from the coast, from the Caribbean, but most of my life is in Bogota, like many, which is the competitivity of the city of Bogota. And we discovered that it was water. We compared with other cities in Latin America in analysis, the city of Mexico, they spent all of the water. They have one of the treatment water called Samala, which is for nice 28 cubic meters, and they push it up they have to push it up 32,000 meters up. Rio has conflict with water, with the shared basins with Sao Paulo, and they have a big conflict of water provision in long term. Bogota does not have the problem. However, our scenarios of climate change allowed us to generate in more state issues than government issues. In the last years, the Colombian governments have had several contributions from GEF. The first one, adaptation project, GEF at global level, which is called Integrated National Program to adapt to climate change, and it has a high mountain component, where we began seeing all the water dynamics and eco-hydrological dynamics for the city. And then we had another GAF, also one led by the World Bank, another one by the Inter-American Development Bank, and other was by us because of the request of the government. We began getting a lot of information, local scenarios of climate change. We realized that in many times we had excess of water, that we're going to have complexities, and we began doing all the possible analysis to propose a long-term solution that would assure the long-term provision. That may have problems in the mid-term, include solutions presented that could be more serious than not having provision, just to have other dams in the protected areas, in Chingasa or Sumapaz dams. So we realized that yes, we do have water. We could have nature-based solutions. We have 600,000 hectares that assure provision of water to the city. And by using the example of what it's there in place, last week we just finished a work that was already published with the aqueduct company of Bogota, and we compared both main water provision systems. In one of the moorlands, and the other one is a river. The difference of cost in metric cube is 29.5 and versus water from Chingasa, which is almost 75%. 70. Why? Because also we realized that having investments of nature-based solutions, not only would we achieve saving the water treatment for Bogota's plant, but we would make it feasible. And the most expensive water is the one that does not exist, and the return of investment is tremendous. So, yes, it is really cost effective, and this is just one example, a local level that could be taken to other cities of an example of a solution based on a nature-based solution. Okay, that's interesting enough, Fabio. Thank you very much. So there was a very good difference between the titles on regional solutions and local solutions. And we discussed a lot in the team which word to choose in the title. Let's leave it regional. We thought it was more comprehensive. But well, yeah, we wanted to encompass all of them. Thank you. Okay, Sandra. Colombia is a country with a great ecosystem richness and biodiversity. I understand one of the countries with the biggest, one of the most biodiverse in the world. Which policies are being implemented from the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development to contribute to preserve the richness and as well to potentialize different services? I want to remind you that our roadmap is called Colombia World Power of Life, not just because it was the sentence of the campaign of the government of the president, because the reflection inside the government is that being a mega diverse country implies really to potentialize that natural capital to generate productive economies that, on the one hand, acknowledge the role of biodiversity, would protect it, but also could be useful for the social inclusion and the construction of peace. How? Our first axis in that development plan is territorial organization around water. Because we are a mega diverse country because we have water. That's it. Without water, it wouldn't be possible. So, being able to acknowledge that around water, this country has had, it's been difficult to understand the diversity of waters, to understand our ciénagas, our floodable savannas. So, we've destroyed, filled, and hidden that water, which is our great potentiality. We need to organize ourselves again around that capacity to regulate water because the climate crisis is going to be manifest, especially with that variability in the water cycle. The uncertainty on rainfall is a reality, and we need water to be able to continue keeping a productive economy. It's not just a model. It's about keeping our main potentiality to generate our national domestic product and reducing also risks by climate change because since we are a mountainous country, effects of climate variability and water climate related issues are costing already several points of the gross domestic product GDP. So we are starting in a Niña, and we have the Niño now, which has all the signs of being a pretty intense Niño phenomenon. Keeping water spaces is key to keep that natural capital could promote to economic and productive capital. Here we need to talk about hybrid capitals, not just about financial capital. Natural capital has to play a role. We need to protect it and make it grow. Natural capital, we have it already there. And this is what, as Gupta in his report says, that is not happening because traditional market and traditional economy has not considered it. On the one hand, organized territory around water. The other thing we're doing in the fourth transformation, you see in our development plan, we have in the same block the conservation, restoration, and productive economy activities, because we acknowledge the need to continue assuring conservation of our biodiversity, to continue generating flow contributions. We need to recover lost nature. We still have at least 50% of our territory in forests, but we have nearly 45% of our national territory where ecological integrity has been lost, and there we have high vulnerability. And therefore, restoration becomes the key axis of the task. And restoration that will generate employment, a productive economy linked to it, and its benefit of that nature that we are rebuilding. So the regenerative economy has to go in with decision. There we have challenges throughout the region. We need that capital to rebuild to become national GDP. That's important in the development bank. Additional to that, we have a third set of actions. How we stop deterioration with loss of biodiversity. So we have less than 10% of the surface of the Amazon. So we are already going to that tipping point, which has a fundamental point. The water of Bogota from Chingaza, the motherland comes from the evapotranspiration of the Amazonian forests. So as far as the Amazon reaches that 25% of the deteriorated area, we're going to have a degradation process. And therefore, water in Bogota and half of our national domestic product is going to be at risk. So for that, it's so important to have measures, coordinated measures, to stop deforestation. So I have to bring that other two things. So it's linked to processes, to crime and organized. Containing deforestation is a key element, is a key fundamental issue when you have conversation about peace, about inclusion. So inclusion of women and people. So that's outside of the of the rule of law and to rebuild the social network. It is fundamental, so not to restore ecosystems, to recover peace in the territory. So also to face the phenomenon that is great, that has to do with illegal mining and organized crime of regional scale. That is really very concerning. And here actions, so we're working with the intelligence, strengthening regional intelligence to talk about determinants. So on the one hand, so control of determinants of deforestation and pollution, and on the other hand, work and so creative dispersion. So in the Amazons, everyone wants to work, but they want to work in their own plot. So to align all the agencies, so we could work in those active nucleus of deforestation we have in the Amazons, and to work with those inclusion and generation of economy, restoration, governance, so and controls of criminal phenomena. So with these four approaches, the government of Colombia is so this additional thing. So as President Petro said, and this is the message that the Vice President said, that Susanna Mohammed mentioned the climate change. So the financial system needs to be readjusted. Resources to serve the climate changes and challenges to recover biodiversity in the way they are not operational. They are insufficient. It is not possible that countries be taking 5 and 6 years formulating projects for the Green Fund or Jeff Fund. In 2030, we have to comply some goals. We need fluidity. So countries, we are paying our debts. The fiscal space is reduced. So we need to mobilize resources for climate action. So we need to have innovative proposals, creative proposals to think out of the box. And one of them is, okay, like in COVID, let's generate a little bit some of these bonuses to flow. Because we are in a triple crisis, biodiversity, climate, and pollution. And there, we need to help with the agency, and quickly, we need to act quick. And the Development Bank, they have a very important role. And we know Cartagena this year, the talk was about those terms, and we really thank you that Santiago de Compostela, they continue talking, because we need financial actions to change the situation, and that countries may act in an agile manner. Thank you very much for the global vision from the biodiversity standpoint of organized crime and peace, and also for highlighting the potential role of the Development Bank. Thank you. Mr. Mayor, continue with the biodiversity. The Niterói city is surrounded by ecosystems also with high biodiversity level. How could ecosystems be part of a development strategy, sustainable, that would potentialize the quality of life of the inhabitants of Niterói? Well, in Niterói, it's a city with a very economy based in different areas, but we are also the center of the biggest university in Brazil in number of students. We have a high level of education, and the opportunity we have, we still have a good part of more than 50% of our territory that's protected, and that brings us many opportunities from the issue of resilience, so that from the city today, we have a level of the climate security that's higher to other cities. But we set up as a priority in Niterói the ecotourism, because the city, our next city is Rio de Janeiro. So it's on the one side of the Guanabara Bay, and Niterói is on the other side of the bay, with 50 kilometers bridge between one and the other. That proximity brings the opportunity because Rio de Janeiro is the entrance door of tourism in Brazil. So for Niterói to be benefited even more from that tourism, we need to have our own identity. Our beaches are very beautiful, but it's not trying to compete with Copacabana or Ipanema. They were going to bring tourists there to Niterói. So we have to build an identity and the evaluation with the own tourist sector, even from Rio de Janeiro, which cooperates with Niterói in that sense. We've identified ecotourism as a great opportunity. So the investments that are being made in protection, recovery of water systems, they potentialize a lot that call for the city. So I just wanted to add some information here. I have to do a lot with the report that was presented here by the economists from the CAF. Niterói was the first city in Brazil, and yet the only one yet, to have a climate office. So we have a climate local authority. And that is important because we are leading the country and setting up climate policies at local level. I participate, I follow up different talks on climate from Rio 92, when all this process began. And I believe a lot in the importance of protagonism of cities and regions in the climate agenda. Because if you see what happened in the last talks and conferences, we've advanced very little or nothing. So in the for the new scenario. So I see it. So we have the lobby. Yeah, they did the work already. So we have a fighting there. We had a judge who works there. If the fight does not continue, we say we are in a very similar situation. We need to bring new authors here to the table. Yeah, I am a part of. So we have the group of mayors here was to take a proposal to have. So most of the part of the emissions of carbon happen throughout the world. So a big part of solutions and mobilization, perhaps is that they may be in the city. So it is fundamental for us to have local government participating. So I am the vice president of DS. So in the national front of mayors, we have carried out this debate from Brazilians so that we can do that movement. So that's greater, and also, and in the cities and positively. So in this scenario, we are together. This is pretty good. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to ask you just to finish on the time runs. We have to continue with this thing. So Latin America and the Caribbean are leaders in the use of protected areas, and Colombia too. So within the region. So I wanted to ask you something that is discussed in the report, how protected areas could have a double role of contributing to conservation, but at the same time promoting local development. First off, so I cannot finish the previous talk about Bogota, so I did not conclude that from the 7 adaptation measures designed in nature-based solutions, and we tested it. So the CF that is pretty robust. So with accompaniment with this, so we have a CF about $100 million, pretty robust. on protected areas. So, protected areas top down. So it's for certificates. So no one knew about these protected areas. No one knew about it. So we created a lot of problem. So if we hadn't taken those measures, it would be a trade-off of having created them. So it's highly positive for the. Yeah, this is a city. So I came to a forum in this city because the guys from the interior have declared ourselves protected areas. The development of our city is not possible because we are kind of confined. And I have a city. So they could contribute to the sustainability and ecosystemic services in our productive agriculture, which is the banana, which is the main thing. So I think that these courses have changed the way to change it. And so we want to have an advance on the proposals and the commercials because of the biodiversity. So if it's OMEX, which is more from, we have more than 55 OMEX. So we have this, and there are many much more coming up, especially indigenous communities that want to turn their territories into more resilient. And they know that OMEX could be an opportunity to generate conservation processes and to improve quality of life that would match everything we dream of, which is life sharing, co-living in between economic growth and conservation of biodiversity. Time's up. Okay, pretty good. Thank you very much to the three of you. Very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much.
De acuerdo, muchísimas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for participating in this. At a given point, Ernesto told us, so we're not going to have a lot of time, but it's been pretty well. So just to finish our event, we are going to ask Christian Asinelli, who is the corporate president of strategic programming of CAF, for his closing words. If you agree, Christian, please, the floor is yours. So good afternoon, everyone. I think that most of you know the saying that says that all roads lead to Rome. We also say all roads lead to Santa Marta. So this could be it could be one of the anecdotes we have. As Sergio mentioned, in September we were in Buenos Aires, and we asked Francisco to help us on October the 1st, 2021. So, as many of you know pretty well, Pope Francisco lives in a country within the Vatican that's called Santa Marta. So, when Sergio went, so I came from Santa Marta, the father stopped there. She said, Santa Marta tiene tren. He began singing that song. How does it go? No tiene tren, Santa Marta tiene tren, pero no tiene tranvía. Si no fuera por las olas. Oh, exactly. That's what Pope Francis answered. Had it not been because of the waves, Santa Marta would die. La zona. So, this is pretty related, please, so to be here in this important event. So presenting these, I would like to thank the whole team, Ernesto, Veronica, I hope she's looking at us now. I hope she's around with us in Buenos Aires. So perhaps the whole team, Pablo, Ricardo, the whole team working on this. Because as Sergio said, we work at two speeds, fast and very fast. And when we began talking about the issue red, the red green,
achicar un poquito el tiempo. Y la verdad que, bueno, todos tienen en sus manos un...
So, as we said here, we have some knowledge that has had this knowledge that came out from a group work from CAF, a lot of professionals committed not only with the institutions, but only with the generation of knowledge for Latin America and the Caribbean. So, especially thank you, who knew pretty well understand, as Paulo, the urgency of the moment we have to act, and the urgency of the need to have a tool that once you helped us create to be able to have this presentation. So that's so important with important personalities like the Vice Minister Sandra, the Mayor of Niterói Axel Fabio, with Captain, pretty good anecdotes. So at the beginning as a captain, he has a lot of anecdotes to share. So pretty interesting, but as Sergio said, America Latina and Latin America and the Caribbean for us is the solution region to global problems. It's a little bit how it is being proposed from the knowledge standpoint and the capacities of roles we have in the region in terms of biodiversity, in terms of natural richness and ecosystemic services. So I think it would set us in a privileged area in the world. And I would like to reinforce perhaps one idea that's central for a development organization like CAF. That has to do with the need to define, to underline, and be able to perform these public policies and conservation that be integral. It is not good just to have small patches and different spaces. If we do not see these problems we have at global level in an integrated manner, and we as development organisms, we work with the governments, we can generate the solutions together. For that reason, the need we had to have this report quickly, the strength we're going to give, and as I said with Sergio, so with several people who worked in the organization, in the team, who work in CAF in Cartagena, of this event, who gathered different banks, development banks, and that we discussed a lot, the climate change issue. So it was present there in a cross-sectional manner in most of panels, and the closing panels in which Sergio participated with Petro, President, most of his presentation was about climate change. And Sergio from CAF proposed some ideas that are already a reality to be able to carry out innovative solutions, to be able to help countries generate tools that would allow them to really work and have real changes, like the idea proposed of the use of special rights of draft from the International Monetary Fund to make exchange for that. We did that from organization for other issues. But it's a proof that we, as a fast, efficient organism from the region, could do, and Sergio proposed at the beginning also. We had this strategic vision 2 years ago to start working in the transformation of this institution, taking a look in the long run, for example, the issue of climate change. First, we thought about a strategy, then we thought about some structures. Sergio mentioned one. That was the climate change and biodiversity action plan, and we also gender inclusion and biodiversity. Today we had a conjunction of work between both management and the management of knowledge, because the presentation of RED did not start here today in this room. That apart from that, Captain, thank you very much. We used to have this presentation in hotels, or at universities. So pretty nice rooms, but They lacked life. And here we have life, research, applied research. And I think, well, Sergio's idea of changing that. So Sergio always says that he has some idea. Some has some just a lot crazy idea. Sometimes it's a pretty good idea. Let's go do it in Santa Marta. Okay, that's good. We ended up doing this great activity. I want to take advantage of this to thank Danilo Guna from the Iraq community, because today we had in the morning, that's where the red presentation began. So most of them who were in the panels, so all of you who were present there, so in the morning we had the opportunity to have an ancestral experience in the Pachamama, in nature, where they taught us a lot. So thank you very much, Danilo, Guna, and all of your community, because it really was a experience that transformed us. So we began the presentation today of our knowledge report with the team of knowledge, who was also there, Ernesto, and all the team listening to you. So understanding from other standpoint how to take care of nature. So that was, for us, very important. We're still here tomorrow in the aquarium. And, well, that's it. Yes, Sergio. We'll think about other things about for the next countries. So be careful, because today we have 20 countries left. So let's be creative to be able to. Okay, this is going to be very difficult.
Pero confío en que
This is very difficult to overcome, but these knowledge shapers are going to help us. So, and this country may find also how to match between the report, the needs of the country, and this problem that's so big that we have, but we want to solve as a generation. I think President Petro said something yesterday that called my attention, to so say it, but between this government and this government, or the governments in the world and the next government, are the governments that are going to have to make changes so that we can solve the problems we have. Otherwise, we don't know what's going to happen. So that space of awareness, that's very strong. Pablo also said that in the end. We have to have urgent actions, some important points to continue working. Awareness, urgent awareness on what is happening, what we have to do, in our case, to plan better and prioritize the financing in each one of the countries. And then what Sergio said, coordination. Not one fictitious coordination, very fast coordination. So we don't have time to sit in big rooms to see how we coordinate. We need to coordinate acceleratedly to be able to comply, meet the needs of the planet, our home. So all these interventions that today in the morning, again, we proposed that we are starting with the red as a pathway. And we began in the community, we continue here, we'll continue tomorrow, and then we have 1 year ahead, and we have a lot of awareness of this issue. And this, as Pablo and Ricardo in the end they said, okay.
de una necesidad urgente, el Papa Francisco también suele decir,
Yeah, I know. Papa Francisco also used to say we have to change urgently the way we have to say the model of consumption. Otherwise, if we don't change the consumption model, we're not going to have possibilities to generate a change, because some of they say that we are at the brink of the abyss. A lot of people say they're in a very difficult situation. We all know if we do not generate a fast action, okay, that's aligned with the objectives of sustainable development from the 2030 agenda we've been working with a lot in CAPS, if we do not generate that awareness to promote a change of mindset required to re-guide the pathway, what are we here for?
creo que es la pregunta que nos tenemos que hacer.
This is the question we have to ask ourselves. And now, closing again, we began with the Pope in Santa Marta. The Pope also says no one is saved by himself. We are on the same boat. So I think that's pretty much the spirit of the report. We know that among us, we could all save ourselves. We have to work together to have a fundamental change I am totally convinced we could do it from CAF with the leadership of Sergio and all of the team here. So I think we're in conditions, but we need the help and a follow-up of the whole of Santa Marta, so just in case. So thank you very much.
Muy bien, Cristian, muchísimas gracias.
Okay, Christian, thank you very much. Okay, now, so we want to thank you all for being here with us today, for sharing with us all your knowledge, for leaving us here the contribution to these these contributions that I shared. So the round of applause for all of you. Okay, until next time. So Rosario Gomez, on behalf of CAF, so we thank you for your attention. And if you got lost or you want to pass on the word, you want something here, what happened here, we invite you to enter to our website. We're here at caf.com and on our YouTube channel. So thank you.
La foto. Y bueno, para todos ustedes que están acá presentes, los esperamos con nosotros, los invitamos acá en Infemar a que pasen al vestíbulo para disfrutar de una recepción.